Hi, Dane Ryan here, and today on
Green Christendom.
we're going to be talking about reincorporating the natural sciences into natural philosophy. Jacques Maritain was one of the great Thomistic philosophers of the 20th century. He had many great insights into St. Thomas Aquinas, into spirituality, metaphysics, the nature of being and essence, and many such things. I am going to be critical of him, though, in one area. His distinction between the empirical and experimental sciences and natural philosophy. I am going to say that rather than this distinction, what we need in modern times to combat reductionism is a reintegration of the modern natural sciences into natural philosophy. We need to combine our basic intellectual experience of the world that shows us that living things like animals and plants have an inner irreducible principle of life, a soul, that gives them motion and inclines them towards telos, and in the case of animals, gives them their inner sensual experience, just like it gives human beings both sensual and intellectual experience. That the growth of a plant even cannot be understood in a merely mechanical fashion, but must be understood as coming from its soul or principle of life. That physics cannot be understood without phusis, without nature, without an inner principle of motion and rest, without a element of irreducible form that inclines it to actions, that inclines things to actions towards telos, or goals or ends. That this runs all the way down. There is no such thing as pure matter and pure mechanism, even though there are, of course, material and mechanical aspects of things. Fundamentally, matter is potency to form, and it is informed all the way from top to bottom. Why is this so relevant right now? Well, it's relevant because I think we need to have an understanding of the world that integrates with our understanding of it as God's creation. That we need to see His wisdom and His glory manifest in all creation, and thinking of things in as less than they are is to fail to see that glory and that wisdom in some degree or other. And in terms of addressing Maritain in particular, it's partially because he does have a kernel of insight in that he sees the need for a philosophy of nature, which would be a recovery in some degree of natural philosophy and or Aristotelian physics, physics. Paul van der Klee talks about how the natural sciences can be a stumbling block of faith to people sometimes, in the sense that that's how they conceive of the world. That's their credibility framework. The Middle Ages, as C.S. Lewis has in his book The Discarded Image, which Paul talks about, had a whole view of the world that they were able to incorporate with their view of the world from Scripture and from the faith. So, while I don't think that we can just synthesize a modern evolutionary perspective and read it back into Genesis or those kinds of things, I think we need to understand how we need to understand how these insights can fit back into a view of the fact that God created the world, and that creation is a manifestation of His glory and wisdom. It is a manifestation of His glory and wisdom, not just in its aesthetics, but also in its intelligible character. And so, a modern science that reduces things to nothing more than matter and mechanism, or matter and mechanism plus vague force, or what have you, needs to be corrected. Also, some modern Catholic apologists and thinkers seem to use this kind of framework for distinguishing between science and scientism. For instance, Bishop Robert Barron uses this distinction a lot. And I think this is, to a certain degree, an unhelpful framework. I think there is a lot of scientism in the basic practice of the natural sciences. And that for them to become an actual reflection of reality as it is, they need to reincorporate our insights from our basic experience of the world, that living things have life, that there is form and nature in all things, and that things are not reducible to matter and mechanism. This needs to be a first principle of understanding, even when thinking of things in their more observable aspects, in their more mechanical aspects, and their more material aspects. So, when one approaches whenever one uses the experimental and the empirical methods, I think those are perfectly legitimate. We need them to understand all kinds of things about particular living things, about minerals, and about all kinds of things. But in doing so, it doesn't make sense in the Thomistic sense and in a basic approach to truth to see biology as having some other object than the living thing as a whole and as living. It would be just biomechanics, or more like necromechanics, the idea of corpses in motion, because if we eliminate life and soul, then that's what a thing is. We can understand that living things have mechanical aspects, but all of these are incorporated into the movement and action that proceeds from the soul, that animates the whole body of the living thing. That animates all these aspects of their genetic, their cellular, their molecular makeup, the firing of neurons, the running of blood, all these things are themselves formal in some sense, themselves already not reducible simply to matter, because again, there's no such thing as merely material or merely mechanical all the way down. To change a phrase of Augustine from seminal reasons to seminal forms, there has to be seminal forms throughout matter. I think life and then consciousness and then intellectual consciousness are probably things that God needs to directly incorporate into the world in slightly different ways. But there has to be basic elements of form in all matter. And then these formal things, these coming together of things in atoms and molecules and so on and so forth, is in a human being or in an animal subsumed under the soul as the total form of the thing. And again, in terms of physics, we need to understand that things have nature, phusis, that they have an inner principle of motion and rest, something which formal nature is basically between a formal and a final cause. It's that which in the thing, which in its form makes it have actions that are directed towards ends or goals. Teloi, I think. Intellecti is a kind of synonym. Phusis and nature. Nature, I think, comes from birth. Phusis comes from something like growth, I think. Modern Catholic apologists will certainly defend the irreducibility, the spirituality, the immortality, and of the human soul. And while the animal soul is probably not in itself immortal and isn't spiritual in the same sense as the human soul, they do certainly possess life that is irreducible to matter and mechanism, and to just defend the immateriality of the human soul without defending also the irreducibility of life and soul and nature, phusis, is to make the human soul into a weird exception. And so to rigorously defend the immortality and irreducibility of the human soul, we shouldn't be a bunch of Cartesians, but we should see the irreducibility of the intelligible aspects of creation all around us. One thing that's ironic is that a lot of creationists and intelligent design folks basically have the same kind of mechanical understanding of life as a lot of modern scientists do. The very idea of irreducible complexity is, I think, a certain misuse of the idea of irreducibility. Maybe, and complexity doesn't make much sense. A thing is more complex the more chaotic it is, in the older sense of the term. Maybe irreducible intricacy would work better. And the observation of intricacy in things is a good thing. It's certainly one of the aspects of God's creation, that that things are very intricately designed in their material aspect. However, their irreducibility isn't that they're complicated machines. It's that they can't just be matter and mechanism. Or the scripture calls animals living souls, which is basically equivalent to what Latin calls them. Animals, things that have life. Anima is soul in Latin, so it's close identity there. And they're called, not very good at Greek, but I know the word for animal in Greek comes from zoe, which is life in Greek. Again, biology, another Greek word for life. So, the irreducibility of the mind is very self-evident. Descartes got that one right. But the irreducibility of plants and of animals, the irreducibility of their life, is a basic intuition of experience of our because we experience the world not just with our senses but with our intellect. We see into things. That's what theoria or contemplation means, that we are able to see into the inner nature of things in our basic sense experience. We have an intellectual experience as well. And the only reason why we see them as less than that is because we have such a mechanical paradigm in modernity, that we basically see the world through those kinds of lenses, through those distorted glasses. It's not our common sense, as Chesterton would put it. So even in understanding things like evolution, if the world were made out of nothing but matter and mechanism, without real form in things and without teleology, without the inclination towards goals, the growth and life of a single plant would make no sense. Understanding that all as mechanism is ludicrous. Things with inner experience, that's obviously irreducible simply because a computer can detect things in the sense that it can give feedback that we can understand, but it doesn't see, it doesn't experience. That cannot be reduced to matter, obviously. It's God just winding up a whole bunch of little bio clocks of organisms doesn't make sense either, or the Darwinian thing makes even less sense and not in terms of evolution, but in terms of natural selection by random chance. No, that doesn't make any sense. If things have form and telos, if there's a shaping of them that maybe takes place not just by God's providence and guidance, but even by their realization of their inner nature and an inclination towards perfection and towards beauty and all these kinds of things, that makes sense, potentially, of evolution, which I think is a fairly provable fact. I know there might be some people in my audience that don't agree with that, and fair enough. But if evolution is true, and if people see really, really good reasons for it, then unless they're given an explanation for that accords with the faith and accords with the idea of the universe as God's creation, then it's going to be hard to just hold two paradigms in their heads. So we need to give a credibility framework that reincorporates these things. And I think that that credibility framework would be to reincorporate the natural sciences into natural philosophy, into phusis, as Aristotle would put it, into an understanding of nature as an irreducible aspect of things, in which things have inner forms and their actions, their activities and motions proceed from that, and it inclines towards certain ends that something irreducible to matter gives them their fundamental unity, gives their actions coherence and goals. Okay. I think there's also an ethical aspect of this. To think of animals, for instance, who share with us not our intellectual or spiritual consciousness, but do share a sense consciousness and emotions of some sort, and certainly sensations that can be of pain or pleasure. To treat them like they don't have that, to treat them like they're mere organic machines, mere meat machines, is to treat them badly and to treat them without our basic God-given human sympathy. Proverb says, the just man has concern for the life of the beast, but the bowels of the wicked are cruel, or something to that effect. To treat chickens like they're nothing more to plants and to raise them in tiny cages does not reflect a good attitude towards God's creation or towards our fellow living things, who, by the way, in Scripture are incorporated into, for instance, the covenant with Noah. God says that it's between not only himself, the earth, and Noah and his family, humanity, but also with every living soul of all flesh, which is Scripture's way of talking about the animals. It also, they are also seen in Hosea's first mention in Scripture of the new covenant. They are seen incorporated into that coming new covenant. And in Isaiah, they are seen as having a place in his vision of the renewed Zion, the mountain of the Lord. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. The wolf shall lie down with the lamb, and so on and so forth. So also, again, to not see the intelligible, glorious aspects of creation. For beauty is not just something we see with our physical eyes. It's something we also see with the eye of our intellect as well. It's to see into, it's a manner of seeing into the inner nature of things. It's one of the things that inclines us to try and understand nature in the first place. Things have intelligible as well as sensual beauty, and even sensual beauty is in some way rooted in intelligible beauty. We need to see the analogy, the similitude between the Creator and his creatures. A similitude which always has with it a greater dissimilitude, as one of the Lateran councils defines. Even the highest angels are more dissimilar to God than they are similar to God. But in order to have knowledge of God from his creation, we need to see creation in its depths. We need to see the life in living things. We need to see the consciousness in not only human but animal life. And thus, this analogical understanding of creation is, in a sense, like a Jacob's ladder towards the knowledge of God. The Eastern Fathers saw psuche as one of the modes, psuche, the vision into the inner nature, the intellectual and spiritual vision into the interior nature of things as part of the spiritual life, as part of the path towards God. Similarly, the medievals spoke of the book of nature and the book of Scripture as both important for our knowledge of God. And Scripture itself speaks of the heavens proclaiming the glory of God as things, as words revealing God, as of the glory and wisdom of God as manifest through his creation. We need to not think of things in a reductionistic manner in order to see that glory and that wisdom, and to ascend to the degree that we can, especially with the help of grace, to knowledge of God. And so, let us put the bios back in biology, the phusis back in physics, the psuche back in psyche back in psychology, and let us reincorporate the natural sciences into our immediate vision of the world as filled with God's wisdom and glory, as filled with living things that have life and soul, of a nature that is not without form and telos. And let us reincorporate the natural sciences into natural philosophy. All right, everybody, you guys could really help me out if you like this video by subscribing to my channel, first of all, by sharing this video, and by liking this video. So, have a good day and God bless from
Green Christendom.